Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back once again. So this is the JavaScript Fundamentals Part 2, and in this episode I thought to cover the asynchronous JavaScript concepts, which is I believe very important for every JavaScript developers. So let's see quickly what are the things that I'm planning to cover in this episode. So we'll first start with the callback concepts, and we'll create certain demo and examples by the concepts on the nested callbacks, sequential and parallel, and we'll understand the problem with the callbacks itself. Callback doesn't have any problem as such. It's all about the development experience, which will be immensely improved if a developer can use the concept called promise, which is followed by this callbacks we'll see about. We'll have a very in detail understanding on the concepts part, and obviously the error handling that we'll also talk about on the promise section. Without async and await, I believe the asynchronous JavaScript topics cannot be complete, and obviously then we'll end up with the async and await, and this is nothing but a syntactical sugar on top of the promise statement, which we'll definitely see once we get into that section. So I believe this is very interesting, and I definitely encourage you to stay tuned till the end. And if this is the first time you are coming to my channel and haven't yet subscribed my channel yet, definitely my request would be to subscribe it, and don't forget to set the bell icon so that the next time I upload any new content, it will intimate you immediately. So let's get into the coding now. So to start with the callbacks, so this is certain examples I have already created. I'm not creating this syntaxes from scratch, just to save certain times. So it's very simple to start with. I believe a function I have just created with a name like print name, and it will console log hello name. Whatever the name it will come into, it will just print it. I have created another function, and I'm giving it a name as async function, and this function will have two parameters I'm passing. One is the name, and other one is a callback function. So it's basically a function itself, and within that I'm just simply logging something like your name will be printed by the callback. And then I have used this set timeout kind of a function which comes as a JavaScript runtime APIs, and it will be triggered after 1 second, and it will call the callback function. So whatever the name it will be passing it through, it will simply log it as I just explained. So if I just call this function Somnath and print name, what you are going to expect, it will simply say like hello Somnath. Very simple, nothing much there. But you have seen like how the callback function is basically being passed as a parameter, and how this function is being called in a asynchronous mode, and after this particular console log print is over, it will wait till this particular set timeout process is complete, and then it will just call the callback function. So pretty simple, nothing much in this particular example. Let's move forward to the next one, which is a nested callbacks. Okay, so let's clean this. So what it happens here is very simple as well. So I have one async function, and it has, like the previous way, it has two things. One is a value and another is the callbacks. So the set timeout function again I have used here, and a simple logic I'm writing, like I'll just check if the value which I'm passing to this function is an even or odd. So this mod operator I have used, and I'm just setting this variable is odd, either true or false depending on the mod value. So if it is, I'm saying if it is an even, means not odd, right? So then I'm not setting up any error, I'm just passing the callback with a error and data. So ideally what happens, every callback as a convention, the first one should be error and the second parameter should be the results. So that way I'm telling like, hey, it's not an odd value, it's an even number. So let's set no error over there, simply just print the data. That is my thought process in this particular logic. And the other one I'm just setting up the error as true, and value is also the value that I'm getting into. So when I'll call this particular async function, what I'm going to do is, you see the complicated callbacks in nested way. So first I'm calling with a 10, and this particular thing is basically an arrow function I have used, and it will do this job. Like first it will check if there is an error, then it will log something wrong, and if not, then it will just print the results. And of course, followed by, it will again call the same function with a different value, and again it will have a different callbacks, and it will do the same job again. Like if the error is there, then it will log the error, otherwise just log the results, and so on, right? So you see, this particular callbacks are basically nested way, and if I just run this application or program, you see like 10, 20, and finally something wrong 3 means it got 31 as an odd number. And as I said, like if it's an odd, then there is an error. It's just a simple demo just to show error and results both. So obviously if I just pass 30 over here, it's an even number, and then it will print 30 only. So just clean this output and rerun it. It will first print 10, then 20, then 30. Okay, and it's complete, exited with code 0, right? So this is a callback, but in a nested fashion. Now let's assume like what would happen if I would like to read 2 files, right? And in a sequential fashion. Obviously, if you see this nested callbacks, it's all running in a sequential. So first 10, and then 20, and then 30. This way sequentially it will be executed. So similarly, let's execute to read the data content from 2 files. So this is something called sequential calls. Let's close the rest of the things. Okay, that's a sequential, and let's close it. Okay, I am not actually reading any data as such, so my thought process is like just virtually I'm just doing it. I'm just have created a read file, and it is taking path as an import parameter, and again a callback. So I'm just logging whatever the path it came from, and assume the file content is having something called Somnath is the developer, right? So this is something, a data that the file will contain, and I'm setting it up forcefully error as null for this demo. And here again, like after 1 second, assume like the file read takes around 1 second. So once this particular process, means reading the content from the file, is over, I'll just run this callback. So what will happen? It will just send out the data over here, right? Because this is the callbacks that will be triggered, because here the read file I'll be calling, followed by the path where my file does exist, and then it will be just logging the results. This result will be nothing but the Somnath is the developer, and again another nested callbacks I'm doing it. So there in that it will be again read another file 2, and again it will log the same record, because here file 1 and file 2 both having a hard-coded content which is Somnath is the developer. So if I run this out, yep. So okay, let's quickly check once more. So let's run this out once again. File reading started. So let's just expand. Somnath is a developer, and when I'm second file is also having the same thing, Somnath is a developer. But here the 2 files being called in a sequential fashion. Isn't just an example to give it to you. What will happen if I just want to run 2 files in parallel? Means at the both same time, both the files will be read. But I would prefer to display the file 2 first. I mean, display the content of the file 2 first, and then file 1. So obviously some parallel executions of callbacks I'll be showing it now. So let's go there. Let's close it. So here you see I have the first one, which is an file read function, and this function is having a same thing, the path it will take just like the previous example, as well the callback. And I've just created a pattern, regex pattern only, just to check if my path contains the file name as file 1 and or file 2, and depending on that I'll change the file content. So this time it will be a different file content, but again it is not actually reading from the file system, but it's just virtually I'm just showing. So it will just match the pattern, and accordingly it is setting the data, and again simple callbacks. So what would happen is, if I call this function with a parameter that C drive file1 and D drive file2, but you see both the functions are being called simultaneously at the same time closely. Like first it will file1 will be called, and then file2 will be called. It's nothing a nested callbacks as such, which we have just seen in our sequential file read example. But it's the same thing. But how then I'll be able to manage the content to be displayed once both the files read? And most interestingly, files2 data should be printed first and then file1. So for that, I have just taken kind of reference of a display file content function, and the file function contains like the simple, like both file1 data1 and file2 data2. These are nothing kind of global variable. You can see at the top I have declared, right? So each time I'm calling the function, I have just set those global variables like that, like data1 as well in data2, simple. And I'm just ensuring like when both the variables are filled in, because it's an AND operator I am using it, then only I'll console log this one. So that way it will ensure that always file data2 will be displayed first and then followed by file1 content. Let's run this one. Okay, so let's clean this first and run it again. You see both the content started at the same time to read, assume, but it always prints the file2 and then file1, because in my display file content I'm just manipulating this sequence over here, but the file read operation started in a parallel process, in simultaneous process. So these are very basic callback examples that I just wanted to walk you through first. Nothing much in that, obviously. But why this promise came back, obviously you probably have understood kind of a nested callbacks, how bad it looks to manage the code, right? And it is not developer friendly, this approach, and can lead to a lot of bugs if it's not managed well. So then obviously the promise is the kind of a savior, and we'll now talk about the promise, and we'll now create all the examples from scratch, not just walk through. Okay, so let's get into that. So let's understand what is a promise from the MDN web docs. It says like promise object represents the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation and its resulting value. Okay, let's little scroll down, and what it talks about in the description section, it says the promise is a proxy for a value not necessarily known when the promise is created. Interesting. And it allows you to associate handlers with an asynchronous action's eventual success value or failure reason. Okay, what's that? Let's understand by doing it. So in my script snippet, let's write something called new promise. Okay, so promise is a instance and P should be capital. Okay, so that's a syntax. So if I just run this particular thing, what would happen? So let's click on this and click run. It says like promise resolver undefined is not a function at new promise this. So now to talk about this, promise actually expects one callback function over here. Okay, so let's create a callback function first. So I have created a very simple function called print hello, and I am just taking it value as a parameter. I'm just doing a console log. So as I said, it expects a function, so let's put it over here and execute it. What do you expect? Let's see. Okay, it says something called a function native code and then promise pending. Let's expand. It has something called promise state called pending, and the promise result is undefined. Okay, now what would happen if I just, let's say I add one more parameter called value 2 and copy this one again over here, value 1 and value 2. Let's clean this out and okay, and run again. Okay, it's again printing function. So that means this value1 and value2 being passed from this promise as some sort of a function. Okay, that's good. So what would happen if I again add one more, let's say value3, and again just copy and paste, but this time value3, do a console log, clean this and run again. Oh, it's this time undefined, so that means it's only sends two parameters, value1 and value2 as a function, and the third one is basically undefined, it doesn't send anything. So let's make it as a fn1, function1, function2, and this one I'm going to delete because it's undefined, it doesn't have anything as such. Function1, and this is, let's say, function2, and the third one we can delete it. So ideally this function1 and function2, these are actually itself a function. So that means obviously the function can be called. So can I call this function? Let's say function1, I'm calling it, and let's pass some value. I don't know, arbitrary some 10 I'm just passing as a function as a parameter. What would happen? Let's run it and see. Oh, this time you see the status gets changed from fulfilled, I mean from pending to fulfilled, and also I can see a value as a result, promised result as 10. Fine. So this basically a value which is covered under a promise, and how to get that value in that case, which actually being returned under a promise proxy. Okay, so for that there is a syntax called .then. So .then is nothing but another function, and this function is also same like print hello, nothing else. So that means it will also have some function called f1 and f2 kind of. So to make it simple, let's make it an arrow function, means only one particular function I'm just using it, and I'll just print the value, it whatever the value I'm getting from this function1, let's just print that value, that's it. So clean it and rerun again. What do you expect? Let's see. Excellent. So now it's basically returning the value, but again what's happening? Again it becomes fulfilled but undefined. Why it is undefined again? We'll talk about. Fine. So let's remove this console log for the time being because it's of no use. So we know, like, simple to access the data from a promise we have to use this then function, and this is simple like a print hello function as we have declared over here, and it will similar will have two functions. So this is one of the functions, anonymous functions I have used. That means I can add one more function over here as well. Okay, some other function I can call it over here like this. Okay, so let's make it like that way so it will be easy to understand. Perfect. So now let's run something as of instead of function1, can we do function2 also and call 20? What would happen? Clean and run it. It doesn't get called, so that means the function1 it's basically get resolved and immediately it returns from the function. It doesn't execute this particular function. Okay, that's a good understanding, but still this is not yet covered. I'll talk about soon why this again becomes a promise and it's undefined. What would happen if we change the sequence now? Let's change from function1 to function2 and make it 1. So what do you expect this time it would be? So for our demonstration, let's remove the second callbacks. Just it will be easy for me to explain, that's the reason. So let's run. As I said, we have just toggled from function1 to function2, and let's see what happens this time. Yeah, there is an error message logged. Let's see. It's saying like the status is no more a fulfilled or pending, but it's set to rejected. Okay, so rejected, and the promise result is now 10. but it is also giving an error saying like, hey, it's uncaught, in some exception raised, and which we didn't handle it well. So that means the first one probably something is a success or positive part of the callback, and the second one is kind of an error or negative part of the callback. Okay, so in promise or JavaScript terminology, these are called as resolve and reject. Okay, nothing else. So resolve is for the success and reject is for the error. So obviously now I can change it to resolve, let's say 10, and reject, let's say I can give some message like say something went wrong because there's an error. Okay, so obviously if I just run this time, as I said, the resolve will be called, and at a time this particular promise will return only a single value, not multiple. So that's why once it encounters the first one in sequence, it will work. So obviously once it encounters the resolve, it will not execute the reject, and vice versa. So if I just execute again, it will be only 10 as a value. And if I just if I just comment this one and clean and run once again, it will say now this is a reject part triggered, but error part also says it's uncaught. So that means some error handling we have to do explicitly. Now to do an error handling, let's do like this. It's very simple. What we need to do, we need to add a catch option. Okay, catch is another function just like then. So it will have a message it will return as a callback, and if I just do a console log and do a messaging over here, what do you expect now? Clean and run once again, you see no more an error occurred, and now it simply says something went wrong. Excellent. As I say, then is nothing but similar like a print hello. That means it will have two callbacks. So we have written only one over here. Let's quickly write the another callback function, and I'm writing like message and something like console.log, and we'll just type like message plus 1. That's it. So what do we expect this time? Let's clean and run. Okay, it is basically calling this particular function because I have concatenated 1 with a message, and I can see that over here. So it means like this promise actually it's return the reject, and then is basically a promise chain, which is again having a return another promise. Okay, but it will have two callbacks. So one is the resolve, which is a positive part, and the second one is the reject part or the error handling or error handlers. So that means the moment it finds this particular previous promise returns a reject message or kind of an error message, then this handler automatically fires this particular error handler, which is a message console log, message plus 1. So that means this catch function is not getting triggered at all. So can we now make this particular error function little bit changed and trigger another error from this particular callback? Yeah, we can do that. Let's write this one and add it up like that. And here you just simply say better throw new error, and you just write this is another error. What will happen if I just do this? Let's clean this out and rerun this application. So let's do what I'm doing. In the second error handler error callback, I'm just raising another error message because as I said, like this then will return another promise. So it is actually returning an error, right? So kind of a reject. So let's run it. You see So the first one is something went wrong, so this is printed already, and this throw error being triggered, which gets actually logged by this catch handler. How to check that? Let's pass 2. So what will happen? Whatever this is another error, then 2 should be printed. So clean and run again. You see 2. So that means this in between error actually caught under the final catch statement. Okay, so that means it's a promise chain the way it behaves. Now let's quickly understand about this promise fulfilled and undefined, why this is coming up like that. So what happens is this, then as I said, it actually returns another promise. So that's why this promise is fulfilled by default, and because I am calling the resolve function over here, so this is a resolve function, I am already calling it, and as well the reject function I am calling it over here. So that's why status is fulfilled. But why it is undefined? Because it's not returning any value as a result out of this function. Okay, so that's why it is going as undefined. So can I just set a value over there? Let's see. So to do that, what I'll do is I'll just make it uncomment and set it over here as a commented one. So what will happen, the first callback will be triggered this time because it's a resolved value, it's returning from the first promise. So what I'll do, I'll just write up something like this, and here I'll just say something like a return and value plus 10. So whatever the value I have received by this callback, and obviously I'm receiving 10 from this resolve, I'm adding up another value with this 10, and I'm returning the summation, which will be 20 out of this promise. So now if I run it now, let's clean it and then rerun, you see now it is fulfilled, but it's returning a value called 10. So that means if I would like to add one more then operation dot then, I can again take this value new and console.log, and I can add value new. What will happen? It will return this 20 and it will be captured over here and it will be printed. Let's see, run, voila, you see now it's 20. And again this then is supposed to return another promise, as it's not returning anything out of this callback. That's why it is undefined. So that's why it's a promise chain is built, and every then functions will be returning one promise. There is something called finally, so I can add finally, and I can just say something like console.log, and I'm saying like all set. Okay, what will happen if I just run this on? It will print first 10, then in this particular function, then it will be triggered, and then it will be calling this particular console log, it will be adding 20 new value, and finally it will be printed at the end. You see, all set, at the end it comes up. Excellent. So this is a scenario where I have two promises, promise 1 and promise 2. The first one is resolving a value 20 and the second one is 30. So if I just would like to take the result in an array from both the promises, how to go about? So for that there is some syntax called promise.all, and I can use an array to add promise 1 as well promise 2. As this is a resulting and promise, so I have to use the then function again, and here I'll be expecting more number of values, multiple values of course, and let's quickly log them out to check what it returns. And if I just execute, let's clean it first and just run, and voila, it says pending first and then 20 and 30. Pending because like the moment I am having this then function, this promise all, then function, it's resolve the promises, but that time the resolve is not actually getting triggered because it gets triggered after 1 second, and in this case after 2 seconds. So till then this particular state of the promise remains as pending, and then finally it basically returns as an array, okay, as you can see over here as a 20 and 30. So ideally we will not create the promise, because so far we have seen like I'm creating the instance of a promise and then I'm just using a then function or catch or finally etc to handle those promises. But in real world it will be something like we'll be calling a service to fetch a data from, and we'll be just handling the promises which will be returned by the service. So there will be another developer who will be creating the API, and that developer will actually return the promise out of the API service. And so that means I'm not going to create a promise of my own, but I'll be just resolving it, that promise or reject. I'll handle the reject, I mean error message or success message, everything through my own handler, means then function I'm calling about. So but before I really fetch any data from any URL, let's do one more round of a quick program. So let's and see what exactly I'm talking about. So I'm creating a function, and the function name I'm calling it an API, and as a parameter I'm entering value. So this particular API is supposed to return one promise, okay, and I'll be calling a service as a callback function out of this promise. So definitely I'll need a function named service. So I'm just calling constant service, and this one obviously it will be a promise. So that means, as we have seen, we have to add to callback, resolve and reject. Very simple. I think you can relate everything now. So inside that, what I'm thinking is, let's I will create a JSON, but before that I want to do enter processing, just kind of virtually I'll do as kind of a asynchronous mode completely, like under, let's say around after 2 seconds this particular service will return some response. So that is kind of a dummy thoughts. So I'm sending like, let's say result, and that result is basically a JSON, okay, and I'm adding result dot old value, and I'm giving it the name as value, simple. And now I'm just trying to add it up, okay, this value what I'm getting, I'm changing this value is equal to value plus, let's say 20, okay, and I am just doing something like if my value, right, greater than is equal to 25, kind of a simple logic I'm writing, and that time I'll resolve basically this result. I mean, then I'll just add a new value to it. So result, add a new property like called new value, okay, and I'll just add this value, and I'll just pass this result as a JSON. That's it, because service generally just returns the response as a JSON format. So I'm just trying to create certain of that replica. Let's save this for the time being, okay. And else, if there is no, just a dummy kind of reject I'm throwing, and in this reject I'll say, let's say something called server error, okay, cool. So what will happen is, so this API, if I call, it will return a promise, and it's a service which is a callback function, and as we have seen, it will have 2 callbacks, resolve and reject, and enter processing I'm doing it in a set timeout API, runtime API, and there is just simply adding a logic like if it is value is greater than 25 or equal to 25, it will return it will add it up the value kind of first it will add 20 to this, and then it will just make a comparison, and finally it will update the property calling it a new value, and it will pass the new value over there, and finally it will just pass it on as a resolve function. Otherwise it will just do a reject function, as simple as that. So now to call this API, what I have to do, I'll to just pass a value. Let's say I'm passing 5. Okay, and if I pass 5 and just save and run, what will happen? Nothing will happen as such. Yep, nothing there. So let's do a then operation, and let's add the value called value, or maybe you can call it result also, whatever, whichever you prefer, doesn't matter. Actually console.log, I'll just print this result. What will happen if I just do this right now? Let's clear this output and run again, and it will supposed to return the response as old value and new value. Fantastic. That is what was the expectation, right? So we will be calling the API, and that will return a promise, which will handle it in our application. So this is our application, right? Our application starts from here, and this is the API. Some other developer will build it up. Okay, now if there is a problem, let's say if it is less than 25, then it will give an error, right? So let's put 2. So summation will become 22. I'm expecting some error. If I run, let's see. Yep, it's saying server error, but it's unhandled because we didn't write up any catch statement. Either you can write a catch statement, or you can add another handler, which is a second callback. That also will work as we have seen. But for the time being, let's add .catch and to add it up as message, and just do a console.log and print this message. That's it. Clean this output and run again, and it's saying server error. Fantastic. So that is how actual real application will work. So now we'll call a free API, and we'll see the same demonstration in another example before we go to the next async and await discussion. Now to check the actual API call, which will also return a promise, as I said, one of the easy way to check this out is JSON placeholder, and here you can just make a fake JSON call, fetch API call, sorry. So it has something called JSON placeholder typecode.com todos one. So it's one is the ID, and as you have seen, like this URL is being called with a fetch operation, which actually returns a promise at the end, and it's being picked by this then function. First it's converted to JSON, which will return another promise, and that promise is basically resolved through this second then function, because I'll get the JSON value over here, and finally I'm going to print it. So if I run the script, you see the value is this. Okay, let's change it because I already executed once. So let's change it to, I think I cannot edit it. That's fine, no problem. So you copy this one and go to our snippet, paste it over here, and if you just run this one, voila, you see like fetch finished, and it returned the fetched information for the ID 1. If you similarly, you can just ID 3 or whatever, clear it and run again, pending, and finally it will fetch for ID 3 all the values that is relevant for. So this overall works this way with the promise concepts, and as you can see, like this cascade, or maybe I'll say like chain operation, makes it quite easier than going for a nested callback function, which I've seen, which is very a cumbersome task for the developers at times to fix the issues if it happens in between, and it's very easy to handle this out. Now to make it more simplified, there is some concept called async and await. So what's that? So let's get into this now. To understand the async and wait, let's start first with a simple function call. I'm saying like hello, and this function will just log simple say hello. Okay, and very simple function. If I just call that function hello, what it will do, of course, it will simple print hello undefined, because it doesn't return any value from this function, which is fine. Now what happens is, if I just put something called async before this function and I just run it, you see it basically returns now a promise. So if I now write, let's say, return 20, and if I execute again, you see its promise fulfill 20. Awesome, right? So now obviously I can use this then function and I can console log from this with this value, as we have seen last time as well. Perfect. So now I can get this value from this proxy, promise proxy. So a simple function hello becomes a promise one, just adding up a async as a prefix to that function definition. Now what about the await? Await is basically to remove this kind of then operation, to make it more simplified. So how it works, let's understand with a real example now. So let's say I'm just making a fetch call from this URL and I'm writing it as const users, or maybe a results, let's say. Okay, and let's change the function user list, or maybe fetch user. Okay, fine. So this fetch we have seen, it basically returns a promise. Now what we'll do, simple, we will put await before, so it will pause till this particular fetch is not complete, and this await is only possible to be add under a function which is having async as an add-on. Otherwise you cannot use await statement. So this line, it will keep on kind of a waiting stage till the fetch is not complete. And after the fetch is there, let's say the data I want to extract, let's say data is equal to now result dot JSON function. Okay, because this result dot JSON function is basically returns another promise. So to make it work without any then operation, we can again write await statement before that. And finally we can just console .log, and we can just print data. Simply this function I can call without any then operation. So first it will wait till the value is coming up, which returns a promise. So the result.json will become a promise, and to extract the data I need to wait. I need to use this await over here as well, and it extracts the data in the JSON fashion. Finally I'm just loading it. So clean this out and run again. Awesome, you see all the users been fetched successfully from this. So it basically makes the developer's life much more easier. And so I hope you enjoyed this discussion overall, and share your valuable feedback, and stay tuned. We'll connect to the next topic on the JavaScript fundamentals.